Well, thank you, Senator Blumenthal, and thanks for chairing this hearing today. I know Senator Blumenthal and I and others on this subcommittee, particularly me as the new ranking member, had looked forward to the chance to work with Senator Lautenberg, who knew so much and cared so much about railroads, and we miss his understanding of these issues and his leadership on these issues. But Senator Blumenthal's efforts to have this hearing today, I particularly appreciate. I'm also particularly glad that Michelle Teal is here. She's the multimodal director from the Missouri Department of Transportation and will be on the second panel. We have two extraordinary panels today, and I look forward, as everybody does, to hearing from them. As Senator Blumenthal has suggested, this is a very current issue. A day before yesterday, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, there was a big article about the conflicting pressures on the industry to do something very expensive and very new, and to maintain a system that's challenging to maintain. I mean, the rail industry is extremely capital intensive, involves lots of investment on infrastructure that's needed to last 20, sometimes 30 years or longer. Knowing those cost considerations, it's good to hear from the dedication of all the people who are represented on these panels today to both supervise this and to make this important industry work. It's an industry that's growing as we use it in more aggressive ways, both for rail and for passenger. The amount of time, resources, and money that the federal government and the private rail line operators have put into increasing safety is important at rail crossings, increasing awareness about the hazards of trespassing, basically increasing the overall safety of our actual rail infrastructure is a good thing to see this focus on. If you didn't know any better, you'd think, if you were an outside observer, that not much was changing. But of course, in the last few decades, incredible amounts of change have occurred in the rail industry, and it's a dramatically different industry than it was just a few years ago. But the technological advancement, what I think has really been a nimble regulatory approach by the Federal Railroad Administration, and the dedication to improving service has been impressive, but we want to hear about how it can be better and what the government can do to both encourage it to be better and to make it less complicated so that you can achieve those better results. I'm very interested to hear about the status of the system today. I'm specifically interested to hear about the progress being made on the implementation of positive train control, which, as almost everyone in this room knows, is supposed to be fully operable by the end of 2015. Most things I see suggest that's a very hard goal to meet. This mandate, of course, requires possibly more than $10 billion and hours of work to complete. We had the nominated chairman for the FCC in this very room yesterday, and I asked him about building all these towers, 22,000 towers. How does that happen in 3 years unless the FCC figures out ways to be much more aggressive in their view of this than they are on the 2,000 or 3,000 towers that they generally maximize out in being able to permit every year. I'm also anxious to hear about the passenger and commutator networks that are how they're managing this mandate. And so positive train control is something I hope to leave here knowing about more than I do today, and to know where we should be headed in the Senate, in the Congress, and on this committee. And again, Mr. Blumenthal, he and I came to the Senate together. We're proud to be in this hearing together, and this is a dynamic and important industry that we need to appreciate for what it is. And so, Chairman, thank you for conducting this hearing today. Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Mr. Sabo, Ms. Fleming said that on positive train control, if I heard her comments correctly, I guess I could have checked the testimony, but I didn't. I think, as I made notes here, that PTC components were not available. at this point, that field testing hadn't been done yet in an adequate way, that you had limited capacity to review what was happening, and the frequency to communicate hadn't been obtained yet. Well, I guess I have a couple of questions. One is, what have I left out of that list? And two is, do you think, based on those factors, it's workable to get there industry-wide by 2015?
If you go back and take a look at the report that we provided to Congress last fall, it really articulates the range of challenges that the industry has in meeting full PTC deployment by December 31 of 2015. And I think that's the key word there, is full deployment. We absolutely believe that partial deployment can and will be achieved, but between the availability of spectrum, the availability of radios, the ability to get the technology necessary to set up back offices, the fact that the entire industry, as well as my agency at sometimes, are competing for a very limited pool of expertise in implementing. There's no question that there are challenges that are going to be a roadblock to full deployment. I think Chairwoman Hersman said it well that, should Congress consider an extension, what we recommended in our report was that FRA be given limited flexibility to, in essence, extend on a case-by-case basis. It shouldn't be a blanket extension. We really have to find this appropriate balance between keeping feet to the fire for expeditious implementation, while also making sure that we allow the appropriate amount of time to ensure that it's done safely and reliably. And that's the challenge. And so we would like to have the ability to actually weigh that due diligence. I think those were actually the terms the chairwoman used was accountability for actions or the lack of actions on implementation. Okay. And actually be able to measure that as we determine what type of extension might be necessary on a case-by-case basis.
But your view is that case-by-case extension made by your agency would be what you'd prefer to see happen?
Again, it's part of ensuring that balance between timely implementation while also making sure that it's done safely and reliably.
Do you have an estimate of cost of what this system has got? Some of the notes I've got here say over $10 billion, some say $12 billion. What's your?
I can provide it to you for the record, but you're in the right range. It's a significant cost. And of course, that's a challenge for the commuter agencies.
Any discussions with the Federal Communications Commission about this the spectrum and the permitting, and how would you characterize those discussions?
Yes, we've been having conversations with FCC on both of those, spectrum availability as well as the need to find a much better approach to siting these antennas. I would call the conversation on spectrum availability considerably more of a challenge. FCC is conflicted in their mandate between the need to ensure resources are used efficiently, government resources used efficiently, and the need from their perspective to not give it away versus what we believe is a legitimate public safety issue, in particular for the commuter agencies, the public agencies. I think the conversations relative to siting the antennas are in a much better place, that there's a clear recognition now of the urgency of finding an alternative means, given the fact that there's some 22,000 antennas that need to be sited, and FCC's traditional process cites about 2,000 a year.
Right.
And in particular, given that the vast majority of these, better than 95%, I believe, by one estimate, are just stick antennas that have, minimal obstruction, minimal, environmental impact, that perhaps we can find a way to be much more expeditious in siting those as we work through an alternative approach on the bigger antennas that may have some environmental issues.
Ms. Hirschman, this is just to clarify for me. You mentioned, I think, one head-on collision where a train derailed and 20 seconds later another train hit it. Is that, do I have that 20 seconds right?
Actually, in that one, there was a train that derailed, and it was struck by another train that was on a different track.
Right.
The train that derailed.
Headed in the opposite direction on a different track that they would have passed, right?
That's right. If the train had been upright, they would have passed each other, but the train was laying on its side, so it was fouling the track area where that train was passing through.
Now, I'm just assuming that no system could totally prevent that you're going to have trains that pass each other in opposite directions, and at some second interval, no system is going to stop a train from derailing that doesn't get hit by the train that's approaching it. I'm not sure how many seconds that would be, but 20 or no system prevents that. But train maintenance, track maintenance, and other things go a long way toward anticipating the, and equipment maintenance, but not a system. Am I right in thinking that?
Absolutely. Preventing the first instance is that attention to track and the maintenance issue. But in the second instance, this is not an accident that would have been prevented by positive train control. But I will tell you that that engineer on that oncoming train saved a lot of lives. He threw the train into an emergency and was able to get it slowed down to 23 miles per hour when the collision occurred. Now, I know Senator Blumenthal knows there was a lot of damage even at 23 miles per hour, but that, I'm sure, saved many lives slowing that train down. And so the human beings are still very good at making decisions in unusual situations, and in that case, he could see the threat ahead and stop the train.
Right, but nothing in positive train control would stop.
No, sir, this was
passing
not.
Each other on opposite tracks at the same time, obviously, or you wouldn't have a system that worked.
Right, that is true.
What you said in your testimony that some rail operators have already complied or will have complied by 2015. You want to tell me what you're saying there?
Sure. We held a forum in February about the status of positive train control implementation. We heard from a number of witnesses. We asked the FRA who they thought would comply by the 2015 deadline. We were told that Amtrak, Metrolink, Alaska Railroad, and let's see, there's one more. There were 4 operators. BNSF Freight Line would likely comply by 2015.
So in, Ms. Fleming, in the case of all the sort of obstacles, there'd be ways around all those obstacles for at least some people by 2015, the equipment availability, the testing, the FRA capacity, the all will, you think there's a way around that?
I think that Metrolink and BNS are unique examples in the sense that because of the accident, they were able to hit the ground running. BNSF has been using and testing PTC for decades. And so they've been on the forefront of that. Metrolink, right after the accident, really moved forward on that. And one or both of them basically is not waiting for the first generational back office server and is in fact using, purchasing their own and doing things a little bit differently than some of the other railroads are. So they've made a conscientious effort to put the money into it. Amtrak, it's our understanding that they will be in compliance with Michigan and the Northeast Corridor, but will not be able to, they don't have the financial resources to actually equip their locomotives. So again, that's more of a partial 2015 implementation.
Thank you. I'll probably have more questions for the record, and thank you, Chairman.
It needs to be upgraded, and that would have been our top priority.
Okay. Ms. Teal, thanks for being here. It's good to have, every state thinks they have the top of whatever the hearing is about. I think we do have the busiest rail state in the country. And if you look at a railroad map of the country, I believe that would bear that out. But on like the Chaffee accident where I think a bridge went down, a highway bridge that was the overpass bridge, Who takes care of replacing that bridge, and how's that process going?
That process is going well. The railroads have indicated that one in particular is going to take care of the cost for that. Once the investigation's final, all of those determinations will be finalized. But we have a really good partnership with those Class I railroads, and we feel confident that those costs are going to be taken care of by the railroad.
And did you say that crossing accidents were a big percentage of the accidents that happen in our state at least?
Correct.
And I believe, Mr. Hamburg, like between crossing and trespassing, you get almost to 100%. It's like 90-some% of all
Over 95% of fatalities, yes, sir.
are at crossings and people who shouldn't be on the track who are on the track.
Yes, sir. And unfortunately, our research shows that about a third of those trespassers are suicides.
They intend to be
Yes, sir.
on the track, about a third. Ms. Teal, the working relationship between what you do at the Missouri Department of Transportation and both the NTSB and the FRA, how would you explain that? Is that
Senator, it's a great working relationship. In fact, we also enforce the Federal Railroad Administration regulations and work closely with the regional office in Kansas City, and have also worked with NTSB on the investigation in Chaffee, Missouri. And we're proud of the partnership that we have, not only with those agencies, but also with the railroads in our state.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Stem, is there any difference now between the way passenger work schedules go out for passenger rail or freight rail?
Yes, sir. Passenger rail now has its own hours of service regimen. They're based on predictable work schedules, and they do have to, by regulation, apply the science that's available.
And your testimony was really focusing on making those even better. They're already different, but your testimony was focused that they should even be better?
My testimony indicates that the problem is with the freight hours of service and the totally unpredictable work schedules and the new pressures that are being applied by the railroads in an attempt to significantly reduce the numbers of safety-critical employees that they have to have on staff to continue the level of service that's present today.
So I heard that wrong. You think the passenger service efforts are actually better than the freight?
Yes, sir. They are a model for us to aim for with improvements in the fatigue mitigation strategies and plans that are now being required.
Okay. Mr. Hamburg, on that topic, and then the topic of only needing to apply to 39%, I want to be sure I have your sense of
My sense is that 39% is low. We're a 90,000 mile network, and we're putting PTC on 60,000 miles. That doesn't quite equal 39% by my math. With respect to fatigue management, Mr. Stem is correct. That is something that both labor and management have working on cooperatively across the board in many areas. With respect to the predictability of our network, a freight railroad is not a passenger railroad. We do have predictable times for yard service and for local service, but for over-the-line long-distance trains, that can be dependent upon what our customers want, when they're ready to have their shipments go. We cannot have a 10-hour call window. If someone is scheduled to report at 12 and calls up at 10 and says, I'm ill, I can't get there, then what? You know, we have to wait to give someone else a 10-hour notice, so that train that was going to leave at 12 has to wait 10 hours until a replacement crew can get there. We are 140,000 miles, including the short lines, outdoor assembly line. We have mudslides, snow, washouts, all of which makes this schedule unpredictable. We support the 10-hour uninterrupted call, but right after the work ends in the first place.
Thank you, and I'll have some questions, a few more questions for some of you. Thank you all.
Senator
Senator.
Blunt, if I may
Mr.
add,
Stem, sure.
the 39% figure is not my figure. That's the Federal Railroad Administration estimate. 140,000-mile network, including some short lines that will be required to apply PTC, and I think Mr. Hamburger's close. It was 60,000 miles of a 140,000-mile segment, and they've been able to negotiate that mileage down to 50,000 miles. So that's the FRA figure.
Is the system, since we've come back to this, is the system, Mr. Hamburg, have to be interoperable? I mean, does it really?
Yes, sir. It's so that a railroad, just to use the name, a Union Pacific locomotive that goes through Chicago has to be interoperable with Metra, the commuter rail there, with Amtrak operating there, with every other Class I railroad operating there. And if that Union Pacific, we have what's called run-through power. If that locomotive goes through Chicago and continues on its way on a CSX track, it has to be able to talk to the CSX back office. And that's one of the challenges, that we don't even have that software yet for the back office. It's going to be delivered sometime this summer.